How are you right now?
A bit breathless, but recovering.
Tell me about your experience with COVID. What happened? When did it start?
So, I speak to you from my home in Delhi, the capital of India, where the COVID crisis is currently raging. I'm on day 15 today from when I first got infected with the virus. It's a painfully slow recovery with a fair amount of weakness right now. And I got the infection from my mother, who got it first. We don't know how she got it. Maybe she went to the market or met a neighbor. So we don't know how it happened for her. And then for me, it started as an itchy throat, which developed into a fever that lasted about a week. And then there was tremendous pain and pressure in the chest. And the last part was the most worrying symptom, because when I got the chest CT scan done as advised by the doctor, it showed that I had COVID induced patches on my lungs. And out of a total score of 25, a score of below 8 means it's mild, between 9 and 15 means moderate, and above 15 is severe. So my score was 9. So I was immediately put on steroids for almost a week, which has helped me feel much better now, of course. We took that risk earlier this year. It just felt that the infections were going down. The virus wasn't spreading as much. So we took a little bit of that risk of meeting friends. We got together a few times, and though we were very conscious of what we were doing, it was a risk, definitely. In a way, the good thing is that I didn't get the infection from those gatherings, because then one would have probably felt worse. But point is, you get the infection, it doesn't matter how you got it. But it was just unfortunate that for the last 13 months, ever since the virus started circulating in the world, and different countries have had lockdowns and all of that, we've been at home pretty much. I live with my mother and our help. The three of us live together in Delhi, and we've been quite careful in the last 13 months, masking, staying distance, following all protocols and all of that. And despite that, one got it, and it's just unfortunate.
How's your mom?
She's much better, thank you. I think the good thing is, we were debating whether we should get the vaccination for her or not. Because we weren't sure, right? Given that it's a new virus, new vaccine, you don't know what sort of a reaction it'll have, and especially that she's 70 plus. But since all her friends were getting it done, my aunts, her sisters got it done, and nobody seemed to have any adverse reactions. They seemed to be okay. So we decided to go ahead. So on April 2nd, my mother got her first dose of the vaccine, and 9 days later, she got infected with the virus. And I do feel, and this is also the opinion of several of my doctor friends in the US who are treating COVID patients in the US, that the severity of the disease was, helped by the vaccine. So if you look at some of the blood work reports of my mother, the reactive protein, the CRP, which is part of the blood work that you do for this virus, the normal range is between 0 and 5, and hers was 33, and mine was 11. So, and even though I developed patches on my lungs, thankfully, touch wood, I don't think she has, because she, so for my mother, it just happened that she, quickly got this, pain in her body, and, fever, and a very bad, painful cough that she couldn't get up. Oxygen slipped to 94. And, but she did recover quicker, which according to my doctor friends is because, probably the vaccine antibodies kicked in. The disease wasn't as severe as it could have been had she not been vaccinated. So I'm kind of grateful for that.
You mentioned that before you were hesitating to get the vaccine. Why is that?
I think, given that it's a new virus, anything new is scary, right? Unless it's not like a happy experience, right? So, it's just, you just don't know. Then there are all sorts of conspiracy theories, which of course, you don't want to get into all that. But then I've been in close touch with, my friends who are doctors and who are actively treating patients in the US and in India. And their only advice was that please get vaccinated the moment you have a chance. So I do think that's a very important aspect in dealing with the virus right now, and especially for older people.
So before, your mother also did not want to get vaccinated.
She wasn't sure. Having a foreign thing enter your body, your bloodstream, you don't know what sort of a reaction it'll have. And then I think it probably helped seeing her friends get it, and so somebody had fever for a day, somebody had no reactions, my aunts were fine. So that gave her the confidence to feel that, okay, fine, let's go ahead and get it done. And, she was fine. She didn't have any sort of fever or any adverse reactions. Though, of course, we did get worried when she got the virus, but at least, you feel that the severity or the craziness of the viral load, was probably mitigated.
And she's actually thankful that she got the vaccine.
I think so.
Was she scared when she found out that she had COVID?
No, because she, like I told you, her oxygen slipped to 94. Like from 98, 19, like 99, 98 is okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
When, immediately sort of in 2-3 days, it slipped to 94. And that was very worrying for me because my mother was not really in a position to really understand what's going on, right? It was me who was monitoring her oxygen on the oximeter, that I could see the value. She's too ill with the cough and the fever and, sleeping and resting it out most of the time for her to really know what's, going on. So she was in a bit of a daze, and she was just taking the medication that I, gave her on the advice of the doctor. And so it was mostly me who was looking at the situation. And just as she, like the worst of her illness was over is when my illness started. And then just as my illness started getting better, our help started to get ill. So we three have been sick at different points in the last 2 weeks, which is in a way good because, it's all three of us have not fallen, at the same time. So we've been able to help each other a little bit. So right now, she and I are taking care of the help, by getting her tests done and getting her medicines and things like that.
So
Yeah.
when you were helping your mother, you were like wearing masks and everything.
No, I wasn't.
Oh.
This is something I realized that, because it's a moment of crisis, I should have ideally masked up, or I should have stayed isolated, but the point is, my mother at that point in time did not know how to check a digital thermometer, did not know how to check an oximeter. She didn't even know what an oximeter was till I told her what it is. And now, if I'm going to take her finger and check it, it's just very difficult to have stayed isolated. And when it's a family member that close, it's not easy. I know, because and the reason why I feel that I could have maybe done this differently is because I see my friends whose spouses, parents have come down with COVID, and they have immediately isolated. The spouses in a separate room, children in a separate room, parents in a separate room, and whatever needs to be done is being done, howsoever is being done. So then that prevents that the entire household doesn't fall sick. So in hindsight, I should have done those things, but I just couldn't. I was just very worried because, I mean, who else would have done those checks for her? It was just me. And so if I had to risk myself, getting sick and getting the virus, so I had to take that chance. And a lot of people, a lot of friends told me that sometimes it's very difficult to prevent, the entire family from not getting it, because sometimes you feel that, okay, you might as well, the entire family, just get it over with. Though I know there are mixed reactions to that. Ideally, you should stay isolated if you can, and take whatever precautions, masked and everything. Our help was, staying masked the moment my mother fell sick. That was very prudent of her. But despite that, because she was, cooking for us and taking care and all of that, it wasn't easy, for her to have escaped the virus. So her COVID report, the first COVID report, was negative. Our helps, but her symptoms are all there, and we've just got another test done for her yesterday, so the result will be out tomorrow. I do hope it's negative, for her sake, but I would say it's difficult given that she has all the symptoms of COVID right now.
But she was already declared positive.
No.
Okay.
So the first round of tests that we had, my mother was tested first because she got sick. I was okay then. Our help was okay then, and my mother's report came back as positive. And her infectiousness was 21. I think the 24 and above is when so the higher your CT value in the RT-PCR test, the lower they say, is your infectiousness. So my mother's infectiousness was at 21. So she was quite infectious, which is as a result, I got the virus within a couple of days of her getting it. And then we got a round of tests done for me, my mother, and the health, in which I turned positive. My mother turned negative. Like literally within 2 days of her turning positive, she turned negative. And the help also turned out negative. But we do have reason to believe that there are and there were a lot of false negatives coming out of the reports in India, especially because if labs are telling us that, that they've been asked not to test, as widely as they should be, or that they're overworked. They just don't have the people and the technicians to, do the testing and give you the reports. So they were literally not taking new tests. So we had to request people that we knew to, help us get a test done. So we have reason to, I feel that all three of us are or were positive, but the reports, because we had all the symptoms, but the reports, showed different things.
Okay, so the credibility of the test can also be questioned.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. But first, what was the most difficult part of your experience?
My first thought when my mother fell sick, first thought was that, I'm not religious, and my first thought was that please, whatever happens, let us or let her be able to be treated at home. I don't have the resources, the energy, or connections or anything that would have helped me get a hospital bed for her or anything of that sort. Like I just wanted to avoid getting into the whole hospital treatment, because already our health infrastructure is so strained. There are no, as the whole world knows right now about the crisis India is going through with COVID. Simply because your infrastructure is completely stretched. Your doctors are completely stretched. Doctors are breaking down. It's impacting them. The ones who are at the front line of things. It's just heartbreaking to see the funerals, people being cremated. There is no place for people to go through their last rite. Cremation grounds have run out of wood. That they now have to approach the forest department for more wood, given that the load of burning the pyres has gone up like 10-20. I can get you the figures, of course, but I'm just saying that this is the load, and it shows you how interconnected everything is. It's going to impact everything that comes before it. So if you can say that the official figures may not be accurate in terms of how many people are testing positive, how many people are dying, right? So you see, so it's not just so you're seeing the load on the cremation grounds, which is kind of telling you a different picture, that even if the government denies that it's not as bad, well, the picture is very different. I mean, where are you going to hide facts beyond the point? Somewhere it's going to come out in some form or the other, and then people are going to know what's really happening, as sad as it is.
As a journalist, I'm sure that you also have other friends who've been telling you about the facts. So now that you've experienced firsthand COVID, how do you feel now that you're also part of the statistic? And do you think that do you feel that the government does not help you in any way, or do you feel any doom and gloom?
I mean, the very fact that I really had not much faith in the hospitals, unless, of course, like I said, if you have a lot of money and connections. But I'm seeing that even with money and connections, people are not getting space in the hospital. And this is something I mentioned before in another interview, that the government and the Prime Minister of India has been talking about Atmanirbharta, which is a Hindi word for being self-reliant. And so there are two ways to look at it. That you can empower somebody to be truly self-reliant, or you can just tell them that, dude, you're on your own. And right now you just feel you're on your own. So it's almost like when you're trying to teach somebody how to swim, right? You want them to know how to swim so that they can save their life in the future. The training and all of that, right? That is needed. You don't just throw them into the water and be like, figure it out. And this is how it feels right now, that you just got to figure it out for yourself, that you are literally on your own.
Did the government help you while you were sick, or did you feel anything?
No, nothing. There is no helpline. There's no national helpline to call currently. I think at the beginning of this year, we thought that, we've beaten the pandemic. So a lot of the temporary hospital last year in preparation, for the pandemic, to sort of give you a picture of, like I mentioned to you, that India is currently 3 million active cases. We've been adding over 300,000 new cases per day for almost a week now. And Delhi, which is the capital of India, the daily deaths are over 350, which is the second highest in the country right now. And last Friday, at least 20 COVID patients died in a private hospital in Delhi because of a dip in oxygen pressure. And the officials of the hospital had to move the High Court to get help on oxygen supply. So I know things are now moving a little bit on this aspect, but it's told that this is not the peak situation yet. We could hit the worst next month if daily infections hit 1 million, which they're expected to if things continue the way they do.
Like for you, did you feel any help from the government when you were sick? You said that
No.
there's
No,
no.
in fact, we got like a couple of random calls, on our home landline that my mother received, and they were just asking that who all are in the family, who all have tested positive, but we don't even know who these people are. So we were apprehensive to share that information, and I mean things were much different earlier. I mean, I remember last year, I used to check how many people are above the age of 45. I think this was when they were preparing for the vaccination drive. How many people are above the age of 45? Do you have any, underlying health conditions and things like that? Which I thought, okay, good. It seems like something's happening. And as of today is the day when, the registration for the age group of 18 to 45, vaccination registration for the age group of 18 to 45 has opened today. The site crashed within 10 minutes of launching.
But was there any like point in during your treatment period that you felt that oh my God, things are gonna get worse?
I personally did when I was asked to, when I had this tremendous pain and pressure in my chest, and that was really worrying me. So the point is that when I was getting this chest pain and all that pressure, and that was really worrying me because I knew something was wrong, because we also lost our sense of taste and smell, and we understand the word. I'm just saying that what we went through was not easy, but I would say it was easier compared to a lot what other people have gone through. So when the report came out the next day, they said that these are COVID induced patches, and it was just very unfortunate because I'm not a smoker at all. I exercise regularly. I remember the last time you and I chatted, I had just come back from the gym, and then I had the same score getting these patches on my lungs, which a friend of mine who's a smoker, and that's when you realize that you can do all that you can to stay healthy and keep your lungs strong and everything, but may not always be in your control, and the only thing you can do is just do your best in that time and try and stay calm. But I mean, for me personally, the chest scans were a worrying part, because then the doctor put me on steroids. I've never taken steroids in my life. Taking these tiny pills which are so strong 3 times a day, and then some doctors also say that the steroids inhibit your what do you say, the antibodies response. I don't know how far that's true. Again, this is what a friend of mine who is a cardiologist in the US, he feels that one should, beyond the point, not be taking too many steroids because they inhibit your antibody response. But I had to, because the pain was tremendous. And you also had doctors who were trying to also milk the situation by telling you things like, oh my God, your doctor's giving you such a low dose, you need to up it by like 4 times. Yeah, it was a bit of a scary point phase. I'm sorry, I'm just rambling on a lot, but for me that was a scary part. And I remember after a very long time, the day of my CT scan results, I meditated at night, and I hoped that maybe some kind of meditation would just help to just maybe help the medication do its job better, or just the mental strength, or just relief in just trying to heal yourself. It's literally trying to heal yourself in whatever shape or form you can. I meditate if I feel the need to. Most of the times I'm talking to my friends, I'm staying in touch, because a lot of them do check in, because it can take a mental toll on you with your family and yet on your own. I mean, your journey is on your own, of the sickness, even though you are together and you are worried for each other. I mean, I think about my friends who have children, and how worried they must be for their children. I mean, as a child, I'm worried for my mother, and I'm worried for my health, because she's almost like a family member. She's been with us for 20 years, and the three of us are like a family. And the worry that one feels for them, I just cannot even imagine if you have children and the kind of worry you would feel for them. Yeah, and I know a lot of people say that, oh, it's corona is COVID is just a virus, it's like a flu, it's like an infection, it'll come go. My point is that it's new. One doesn't know who it's going to affect, how. I mean, a lot of people, I know, like my oldest friend was 92 and he succumbed to it, and his wife was around the same age and she came out of it, and both were perfectly healthy. Lots of people who have diabetes and other underlying health issues, it affects them in different ways. So my point is, one just doesn't really know, and the only thing I guess you can do is just take care, take all your precautions, and if you get it, then you just got to make the most of whatever you can do to get better.
Is it even possible to think positive when you have COVID?
I think you sometimes are faced with a choice that you have to, for your own sake. If you have to get better, you have to think positive. You are not left with a choice, because if you're going to think negative, it's going to get worse.
From your point of view, how is the situation? Like, what's the worst thing that you saw in terms of the situation in India right now?
I think the biggest crisis right now in India, and especially Delhi, is the crisis of oxygen and hospital beds that people are not getting access to.
So, what's the worst thing that you saw? You mentioned that the infrastructure is really bad. So, the government wasn't able to prepare.
No, sorry. No, we were also, our testing has not been that high either. We've not been testing enough either for us to really have a clear picture of what's going on. And then, like I said, labs are being told to not, or halt testing, and all of that was also going to make a difference to the numbers. And right now, given this situation, data is a very important aspect to understanding this virus going forward. So we are not just looking at helping but to understand this virus going forward, you need transparent data to help you understand what's really going on. To make sort of longer term strategies and policies, going forward. But I have to say, I think in the last couple of days of last week, when the things have just spiraled out of control, is basically my entire social media, my Facebook, my WhatsApp, Instagram, everything is just filled with people asking for help for hospital beds, oxygen, crucial injections, medicines, literally. And it's civil society and people like us who are circulating these messages in our networks, that people are able to get some sort of help or some sort of assistance or some sort of leads. And I also know that newspaper that I used to work for many years ago, so they open their DMs sent to us, and we'll post it on our DMs. So newspaper, like the one that I'd worked for, they are doing it like that, because what happens with a lot of these forwards and all of this is that a lot of these numbers are out of service, unverified, so you're already in a crisis situation and you're asking for help, and people just send you like a bunch of numbers that you have to then call up and find out, and then all of that. So now, the interesting thing which I find with people, that they've developed their own organic ways of dealing with the situation by saying that, what, let's help each other, let's first verify these numbers and then give them to somebody, which is so heartening, because then ultimately that's a little bit more of a help, as opposed to me getting flooded with 10,000 numbers and I'm already panicking because I need that help, and then I can't, I have to keep making those calls. But if somebody does that work for me, it just makes it easier. So people who may not have that much of a crisis situation in their homes or in their lives, they're doing a lot. And again, of course, I'm speaking from my limited circle of people that I know, but this is what a lot of people are doing. In fact, a friend of mine, his father had COVID, and yet he was sort of spending his entire day when he was not working, is still is doing that, sending numbers, sending contacts, and just circulating whatever resources that he knows of. I think it's the rise of the ordinary people at this time, which is literally keeping people afloat, even as many are not able to stay afloat.
But the government is not doing their share.
Well, the government is now, the we had this PM Cares Fund that was started last year, which is now, I think as of today or yesterday, the announcement came for that fund was also off limits to being audited and all of that. So that was another thing, just like a black hole. And now aid is also coming in from other countries who are sending in ventilators and oxygen and all of that. 3
Mhm.
million 300,000 and 3 million active cases and all, over 300 active cases. These are official figures, but I'm
Mhm.
saying that the official figures would be grossly an underestimate of what the reality is on the ground.
Yes. And you said that you mentioned that the testing labs, they're asked to stop testing. Why is that?
Hold off
Oh,
testing, hold off
why?
testing, because
Why?
they're overworked.
Oh, they're
So
asked to hold off testing.
and
But
there are lots of false negatives also that are coming up. Like I told you, like my mother tested positive, all the symptoms, and within 2 days she tests negative. How is that possible? My
mm,
help, who has all the symptoms, tests negative when she has a bad cough and all possible COVID related symptoms. So
oh,
in fact, I mean, if you look at, for example, one of India's poorest states, Bihar. So,
had
for instance, in Bihar, which is one of India's poorest states, only 10 in 38 districts have more than 5 ventilators. So, my
oh,
point is that because we've not invested in health infrastructure, I mean, I think OECD countries invest about 7 to 8% in their health infrastructure, and we are at less than 1.5%.
mhm,
So and look at the population of our country, and compared to other countries in just
mhm.
that proportion. And a crisis like this is bound to have an effect like this, where everything just crumbles one after the other.
What do
And
you
so
think is the final straw? I mean,
I
uh,
I don't know. I just hope it doesn't come to that.
mm,
I mean, you're going to have to. You're also looking at the pressure on doctors.
mhm.
Who are working around the clock. A lot of doctors are also volunteering their time. Spending 2 hours or 3 hours a day, giving time on the phone for a free consultation. But doctors are breaking down. They don't know
Oh,
what to do, and they are the ones who are supposed to keep us healthy.
Can I ask something about that?
sure,
You
sure.
mentioned that doctors are breaking down. In the Philippines, there are instances wherein hospitals could not accept any more patients,
That's
whether
happening here.
whether they are COVID-19 related diseases. When it comes to COVID-19 related diseases, they're not accepting any more patients. What's the situation in your hospitals like? Does that happen, or are
Oh
your
yes.
hospitals being turned into COVID centers solely
Um,
accepting COVID patients?
so a lot of hospitals are being turned into like fully COVID hospitals. That's happening, but a lot of people are getting turned away from getting any sort of treatment, COVID or otherwise. For example, the hospital where I went to get my chest scan done, after a certain time in the evening is when they allow COVID patients to come in to get the scans done, because obviously they don't want to risk other people getting it. But to answer your question, in fact, I was seeing a video that was circulating, I think yesterday, where the family of a patient who died in the hospital started beating up the medical personnel in the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a one-off case, very few cases. I mean, few cases of violence, but my point is that's not the point. The point is that even if one case is there, that shows the kind of pressure and strain and everything, that there are families who are driving like hundreds of kilometers from another state, neighboring state, to come to Delhi and try and get treatment, and they're being turned away. My own uncle, who's 94, was turned away from a hospital close to our house because they said, we don't have oxygen, we don't have a bed. They had to use some sort of influence and requests, from the owner of the hospital. Even then, they were trying to get him to sign a form saying that, if anything happens to him, we are not responsible. And
Wow.
and then I'm told, again, this is unofficial, I don't know how far it's true, I'm told that hospitals are also looking at the age of the patients who are coming in and sort of, making decisions. But for many days, and my cousin is in America, and she was spending, literally spending entire night staying awake, coordinating with us, coordinating with, people in Delhi. And her brother in Delhi was, just sort of driving around looking for a hospital and requesting, and, arguments. And you can imagine how worse things are. I mean, the virus also has a class dimension. When you say that if any of you show symptoms, then you must isolate. And then you have families of 5 and 6 living in, a hovel of 10 square meters, right? I mean, and then you also have to see, that in India, a lot of people are diabetic. The number of diabetes, people who have diabetes is quite high. I mean, one health crisis can show you, how you're equipped to deal with it. I can't even imagine what it's like.
Yeah, like, is there any discrimination for COVID positive people?
Given the kind of discrimination we have at so many levels for so many things, I won't be surprised if, this is another layer of discrimination that gets added if it hasn't already. I mean, I won't be surprised. I won't be surprised at all if there would be discrimination of this kind. It's better to know and get yourself treated and figure out getting better as opposed to. But like I said, I don't have any personal, anecdotes or stories or anything. But I won't be surprised. I won't be surprised if that's true.
What do they think about COVID? Do they believe that this exists, considering that the virus has spread so much in the country and it's the gravity that the country is experiencing?
I mean, a lot of people in the low-income neighborhoods do believe that there is no such thing as COVID. They think it's a global conspiracy for some reason. That couple of the top rich, 3, 4, 5 individuals of the world have gotten together to launch this conspiracy of COVID on people to scare them or for whatever reason. And the thing is that we are seeing a majority of the COVID cases in the cities, especially like places like Delhi and other places, and Maharashtra, Bombay, of course, which is very badly hit. Bombay, which is the financial capital of India. But I'm saying that in low income neighborhoods and in the slums and all of that, the disease, I mean, the virus is yet to sort of grip people the way it has in the cities. And of course, the worry is that once it reaches rural India, and of course it has, in many places it has reached. In fact, People's Archive Rural India, where I am one of the trustees, my colleagues over the last 13 months have done over 120 stories documenting how the pandemic has affected the lives of ordinary and rural Indians. And not just in terms of the health crisis, but the economic and the social crisis and all of that. So hopefully, things change, but they're also looking at making the Indian vaccination is, I think, right now currently the most expensive in the world. Somebody who's already economically strapped, who doesn't have enough to eat, is he going to spend that money on his next meal, or is he going to get a vaccine? I mean, those are things also one needs to think about. Irony. It's a big irony. Countries like us, India, Philippines, in the global south, we've been supplying all the raw materials to, the global north. And I'm just surprised that, we were exporting vaccines and all that, which is fine that, you do, but you also have to look at, what's happening in your own country and take care of that as well. That's important. For things to not spiral. I mean, right now people are so angry with the Prime Minister. Even the ones who have supported him are just so angry with what's going on. So it's not looking good at all.
So they're not actually giving away free vaccines like the ones that you manufacture in your own country. They're not giving free vaccines to those people who cannot afford it.
I mean, I think in certain government centers there are. But I think there is a lot of price differentials that are happening right now.
What do you think, in your opinion, is their priority right now?
I don't know. I wish I knew.
In India, does religion have an effect on the rise of the COVID cases?
A lot of the criticism has been on the Kumbh Mela. Today, as of today, they allowed 25,000 devotees to take a dip in time, and they claim to have followed all protocols. But I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, your country's clocking the highest number of COVID cases. It's spiraling out of control. How are you allowing people to do this? Take dips. I mean, one respects, rituals and religion and all of that, but not at the cost of your health. And today was one of the days. It's called the Shahi Snan. Shahi is like royal, and Snan is bath. Shahi Snan, and 25,000 people were allowed to. This is from the news report that I was reading. That 25,000 people are allowed to take a dip. And then you've had, we've had election rallies happening in the states. Massive number of people coming out, and there have been instances of the leaders. My point is that if you're a leader of a country, and who are looking up to you for many things in leadership and the way forward and all of that, at least the minimum you could do is just stay masked all the time, so that you're giving out a very clear message. I mean, at the beginning of the year, we had political leaders saying that this is the end game of the virus. We've beaten it, but clearly not. And then those election rallies seem to be a priority. And I mean, as I mentioned also, is that over the years, our investment in healthcare is beyond dismal. And it's and I told you that to isolate from this virus is also a function of privilege. It's problematic at so many levels.
People are still allowed to leave India. There's no ban on flights.
No, there is, but I don't know how this is working out. I mean, this is what I was told, that there are charter flights arriving, and people are paying way more to get onto these flights, the ones who can afford it, of course, and get out.
How are the lockdowns? Do you have like lockdowns in India? How are the lockdowns in India? Are they?
I'm saying that lockdowns may help curb the spread of the virus, and they lead to a majority of the people going hungry. So the migrant crisis in India last year emerged as the lockdown any time for people to prepare. Migrants and workers were, walking on the highways, not knowing where to go, what to do, losing jobs, losing income, losing, not having food. And these measures have to be thought through clearly, keeping the welfare of the most vulnerable part of your population in mind. And believe me, the most vulnerable part of your population is nearly 70% of this country. So who are you really doing it for?
Considering the crisis that you are in, how is the vaccination program of your government right now?
Vaccination is a long-term strategy, right? And like I mentioned to you earlier, that my friends told me, that my doctor friends in the US told me that the severity of the virus was lessened for my mother since she had her first dose of the vaccine. And I mentioned to you that my health, on the other hand, is deeply suspicious of the vaccine. She thinks people are falling sick because of the injection. So now you have to deal with people with all sorts of ideas about this. So, I mean, personally, I would go with what science and medical experts suggest. Now, fewer than 2% of adults have had 2 doses in India, and less than 10% have had even one. And as we speak, today the vaccine registration for the 18 to 45 age group opened up at 4 o'clock India time, and the site has crashed, which is quite a symbol of how things are currently. I mean, the private individual who's making the vaccine, he's wanting to profit from it at a time like this, which is so sad.
How did getting COVID change your perspective about the disease? Do you have like any learnings or advice?
Because it's a new virus and nothing can be said with certainty. Of course, certain things are, but not everything, and especially long-term implications. I think one can focus on building one's immunity, especially your lungs, because that's the main organ that the virus targets. Follow all precautions, do your best. And I think the most important learning that for me that came through is that we're also interconnected. What happens in one part of the world will affect the rest, and none of us is immune from it. And we should also keep in mind that COVID-19 is a rich man's disease, and the poor in countries like India are suffering because of it.
As a journalist working in a developing country, what are your thoughts on the situation of first world countries getting near normalcy? Like considering that India is a top pharmaceutical source worldwide, and the Philippines is a top exporter of medical workers.
I mean, clearly the countries that are reaching near normalcy have made this a priority, right? And the government, the political will and the government initiatives and the efforts have been clearly in the right direction. They focused on what is important and what needs to be done. I mean, a lot of us feel. I mean, maybe it's a very obvious thing to say that last year in India, when the pandemic was being reported, it was coming out, we could have just shut down all our airports and tested everybody who's had any association with any airport in this country. And look at that population in comparison to the entire 1.3 billion people. So if some foresight or some, thinking had been done, we could have prevented this massive disaster, at least to some, we could have tried to contain it. So literally, just think about it. 1.3 billion people, 70% is your vulnerable population. 10% might have any association with the airports or may travel or whatever, or howsoever many. It's still so much less, and you just test all of them. Just consulting, different, people who would have been able to advise you better. I mean, I do think things could have been done and handled much better, differently.
But right now, what do you think is something that we should learn, like other countries should learn in order to prevent what's happening?
I think, first of all, definitely look at your investment in health infrastructure. Make it a priority. Yes, we look to the government, to sort of be, they're elected for a reason, right? But we also have to, look out for ourselves. As far as COVID is concerned, follow all precautions, do what needs to be done, stay masked, stay distanced, take your vaccine, all of that. And despite that, if you still get it, you still fight on getting better.
What are your thoughts on resiliency? Like a while ago, you also mentioned something about resiliency. Like I think we're both similar. Like in the Philippines, they're always harping on resiliency. Like, oh, okay, do a good job. We all have to help each other. Filipinos are strong, and I'm sure that listening in your interview, it's like even in India, they're also doing that. But what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, like I mentioned to you earlier, right? Like that Atmanirbharta is a favorite phrase of the current prime minister, where he's harping on, people being self-reliant and all of that. But like I said, that you can be self-reliant after a certain point, of a certain help that you've been given, that you're empowered to be self-reliant. That you can't just be, made to feel that you're just on your own. That's what it feels like, that your Atmanirbharta in this case just means that you're on your own.
Okay.
And that's the shade of difference. That's the shade of difference of the meaning that is that's coming through. That really Atmanirbharta, what do you mean? That now I'm just on my own, I just have to look out for myself? I mean, how are you really empowering me to how are you really empowering me to be self-reliant?
Now it's just a matter of surviving.
Yeah, you're left to your own devices. Figure it out. And that's the interpretation, right? I mean, that's how I felt. That's how a lot of us have felt. Our feeling.
About that. What do you think about medical professionals, politicians who keep saying that our country is doing better than India? We're doing okay. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, my first question is, how does that help? How does that help anybody? I mean, how does it help Philippines? How does it help India? I mean, these comparisons. My point is, if I say that if I'm in the Philippines and I say that, oh, Philippines is doing better than India, and this is how we're able to do better, and maybe this is what India can learn from us, or maybe this is how other people can learn from us, or how this is what we can do to, this is what we can continue to do that will help us stay. I mean, my point is, this is not a competition or a comparison. This is a time for cooperation. and lifting each other up, each other's spirits. You can't yes, you may say this to temporarily feel better about yourself, but how does it help you or help the other country or help anybody? You can just talk for yourself, and we can learn from each other, we can help each other. And I'm saying, and from a very micro perspective, my own illness, when I saw that my own local people network helped me survive it, I mean, this is what we need at a global level to be able to fight something like this that has befallen humanity. I mean, it's crisis of humanity, and it's only humanity that can help make it better. This is not the time to
Like,
flex.
considering the situation of India right now, the massive number of new cases every day, does it feel like you're back to square one again?
Back to square zero.
Yeah, like from the start of fighting the pandemic.
I think because this strain, this particular strain which they're saying is more infectious or more virulent, and it's infecting quicker, faster, and literally it's spreading like wildfire. It's it's worrying. And the point is that the virus has been mutating, right? I mean, that's what's been happening in different countries, and it's happening everywhere. I mean, that's how the virus also survives, by mutating. So, I mean, literally, the need of the hour is to stop the transmission. I mean, in fact, I was watching a news show, an Indian news show, where they got together a panel of virologists, where they said, that, oh, is this variant the problem, or is that variant the problem, or all of that they were debating. And of course, those are important things to talk about and have knowledge about. But the simple thing they said was that you need to stop the transmission, whether it's this variant or that variant. So, so whether you they're talking about double masking now, or sort of staying distanced, and, following the usual protocols, washing hands and things like that. That's the first thing that will stop any variant from spreading. So I think that is something that one needs to keep focusing and stressing on.
I was reviewing the daily cases of India, and there were instances around December and January wherein there were no new cases reported, zero new cases reported. However, around the early parts of March, the cases started surging again. And then just a couple weeks ago, that's when it started hitting 100,000 cases daily, 200 in 7 days, 200,000 cases. And then just a few days ago, 300,000 cases. Where do you think it went wrong again? Because India had a hold of the situation, at least if you're going to look at the number of cases being reported daily.
I mean, clearly we didn't have a hold if it just spiraled out of control like that. Like I said to you, the election rallies in the last couple of months, we've the religious religious gatherings. I think some of these this two three main events, main sort of public events that have led to people just getting lax and thinking that everything is fine. And then, of course, within individual networks also, people started thinking that, oh, maybe it's, we've beaten it, and, it's gone, or it's lessened, or, maybe we won't get it, and all of that. Everybody thinks that they're exceptional, right? Which is not the case. But clearly it's just, one can't really pinpoint for sure that, yeah, this is it, and this is what led to the exponential rise in cases. But it's a combination of factors, not the least of which are these public events, and getting lax in following COVID protocols. I mean, in India it's very difficult to socially distance yourself, given the amount of given the number of people. It's even culturally we are not socially and culturally we are not the distanced type, I would say. And you have to also keep in mind, a lot of people are not even aware of COVID itself. They might just think that it's a flu, or it's just a virus or whatever. So it's affected people differently, and how they perceive it, and how they react to it, and the level of awareness is different. And again, like I said, in India it's very difficult to paint people with one one common brush stroke. It's just so different. Like, one area in Delhi would be so different from another area in Delhi. And one can't say that, it's the same everywhere. But yeah, I mean, my point is that you would probably, some sections would get fatigued, or, some people would get fatigued if they were doing it diligently. Some people are not even aware of, what's happening. So to first to have that level of awareness and then to follow it and then to get fatigued, that's another cycle of things altogether.